Welcome to the Peacebuilding Practitioner, a resource page and podcast for people working on conflict, on peacebuilding, and on social justice issues. My name is Björn Eser, and I'm the founder of and shaker and maker behind the Peacebuilding Practitioner. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Peacebuilding Practitioners podcast. Season 3 is all about digital peacebuilding, this highly complex, tremendously exciting, often messy and quickly developing intersection where emerging technologies and the digital world on the one hand and conflict transformation, peacebuilding, human rights and social justice work on the other hand meet. In today's show, I have the pleasure of talking with George Katz from Bellingcat. George is working with the Justice and Accountability Unit at Bellingcat, and he is one of their researchers, investigators, and trainers. Welcome, George. It's great having you on the show.
Hi, Björn. Thank you for having me.
Great. I introduced you just very briefly, and that's actually all I know about you. We had a pleasure of chatting about half a year ago during one of the conferences. But can you tell a bit more about yourself and your work, especially what you're doing at the moment for Bellingcat?
Yes, of course. So Bellingcat traditionally is associated with a journalistic output. I work for Justice and Accountability Unit, which is a joint initiative of Bellingcat and Global Legal Action Network.
Yeah.
And the goal of this initiative is to make open source investigations admissible in court. So when we perform these kind of investigations, we follow a strict methodology, which we develop ourselves based on the previous work. So with a view to make our findings legally sound in international and national criminal proceedings.
That sounds thrilling on the one hand, but also very challenging on the other hand, not just from the investigation point of view, but also, as you said, meeting high legal standards and making sure you have something that actually works in criminal proceedings. Yeah. You mentioned Bellingcat, and I tried to read into them in the last year and a half, or when I first started learning about them. And for people who want to learn more about Bellingcat, there's an excellent book or an audiobook, if you prefer that, by your founder, I think. It's called
We Are Bellingcat by Elliot Higgins.
It's called We Are Bellingcat by Elliot Higgins. Great. And I'm going to put that in the show notes. So if someone really wants to know more about Bellingcat, the methodology and some of the earlier cases you worked on, I think it's a thrilling book and infotainment at its best.
Yeah, it's definitely a delightful read.
Yeah. George, you mentioned open source intelligence. For people who are not tech geeks, who are probably not in open source intelligence and in legal proceedings, what are we actually talking about when we talk about open source intelligence? And can you explain it in a way that non-tech people can easily follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I would like to mention that I don't call it myself open source intelligence. It's a term that kind of sticked to anything related to working with publicly available materials, right? But actually what we are doing is open source investigations.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a bit different from producing intelligence, which is a product, right? We are connecting dots rather than providing clients with sort of course of action, like as traditionally intelligence is perceived. But so essentially it's called digital open source investigations. And to understand what is open source investigations, right, we have to first define what is open source.
Yeah.
Right. Open source information, right, is defined as information that can be accessible to anyone without a special request, special authorization.
Yeah.
Right. So it's available to general public. And,
okay. Yeah.
And here I have to mention that financial obstacles do not make information closed source as opposed to open, even though it can be extremely expensive, right? For example, traditionally, I think there are four main categories of open source information. The first one is geospatial services like Google Maps, Yandex Maps, Wikimap, and other online web mapping services, right? Which can be maintained by proprietary companies like Google or Yandex or any other, right? Or they can be maintained by open source community, like when people can actually add, their own places, their own comments.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a merge of both.
Yeah.
And here, sometimes they are free, like Google Earth, Google Maps, and they are free to use. But there are also satellite image providers, which we can request. We can task them to take an image over a specific location because we have an interest, right, to see what happened there, how situation evolved. And a cost of a single image, depends on the provider, can vary. It can be as high as $200 per image. The most expensive can be up to I think even higher than 5,000. So definitely it's financially restrictive. But even though it may not be financially available to everyone, it's still considered to be an open source.
Yeah.
So the second category after like geospatial services is media, like BBC or Financial Times, like classical media outlets, right? So when they publish something, the information becomes available to everyone and it becomes open source. Again, here, if you need a subscription for one of these services, like Financial Times can cost, I think, £350 just on top of my head a year, which is not nothing, right? And it would be open source as well. The third one would be social media, which is social media networks like X, Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, which has definitely gained its momentum. And now it's basically became the primary source of information. It feels like everyone moves there.
Yeah.
Right. And the other one, the last one, is a category about archiving services, which are kind of preserve stuff. You can find there some, like basically everything that kind of doesn't fall into the first three categories. But mainly when we talk about this actual investigative work, it's mainly geospatial services and social media. Right, because they kind of provide you with direct sort of evidence, right? Or information can be evidence rather than media when they report on something, right? And quite often they may say like, well, according to a source. Well, go figure who was that source, right?
If I get you correctly, I think it's rather clear. If we compare it to some of the stuff which has been published on WikiLeaks or Edward Snowden or around the Panama Papers or others where you say, well, here someone really needed access, very often some certain classification to have access. So this stuff you work with is something where you and me and others taking the financial constraints out could basically have access to it.
Yes, it's good that you mentioned this kind of information as well, because here I have to make a separation. So the services, like the four categories that I mentioned, we would call them a white list of sources, right? Where there's no legal or ethical contradictions of using them, right? So white. On the opposite side, it's black ones, like the ones when you do investigations, we are not hacking ourselves, we're not stealing ourselves, and we're not spying ourselves, right? Because not only because it's illegal, but because the whole purpose of using open source investigations, and I think we're going to talk about it more later, but essentially is to make it replicable by anyone.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you hack something, the other person would be able to hack. And you, I think, get the idea is going to be the same for Adam.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, when there's black and white, something is always in the middle. It's a gray zone, right? Gray area. And WikiLeaks and these kind of leaked databases or applications that kind of scan your phone for your contact, which they can use. It's in a gray area because there are no legal constraints, right? But at the same time, there are ethical moments, which for us is very important at Bellingcat, because we're conducting ethical open source. So it's written in our mission, right? So we conduct it ethically. That's very important, not just generally, but And here it's also important to say that although we can refer to them, we never rely on a single piece of information. It always has to be more than one, right? It must be triangulated. So if it's just the leaked database, and we may use it as it, but if it's not confirmed by any other source, we will maybe mention it, but it will unlikely be used as a main source of our findings.
Okay, I think that makes it very clear. Probably coming back to what you said originally, the open source investigations, which is like your core business, and I think where you really made yourself a name, and where you're probably one of the pioneering ones in this field. Can you just walk the audience through what would that actually look like on a concrete example, where you say, okay, this is something we were interested in, this is something which was disputed out in the public, or this is something where we thought this is a current event where we need more verifiable information. And what does your approach look like? Walk us through.
So Here again, I would like to emphasize the separation between the classic Bellingcat and just an accountability unit, which are similar in the methods, right? Because we use the open source tools, right, and open source materials. So the example of work for the journalistic output, the classic Bellingcat, is, for example, there is a video of executing people somewhere in the desert. Can't really tell where it is, right? At the first glance, I would say, right? But we are really stubborn in finding out what happened. So we look at different signs of, so we have to geolocate it, right? So geolocation is the method of identifying the precise location of this, right? And it's one of the ways to verify what we see, right? So before we actually go and say like this material, this image or video is real, we have to verify it, right? To essentially confirm that what we see, it's what its author tries to convey, right? So this is actually corresponds to what, because we of course face a lot of issues of recycling information, especially now in the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. We see a huge amount of materials which are not related. They're related to Syrian conflict, but they try to be presented as if they occurred now, right? So we verified by geolocating it. After geolocation, what happens? We chronolocate it, right? So it means that we identify the time when this video was taken, right? It's important to mention that it's actually when the video was taken, not the event, because sometimes we see like the remnant of a rocket. It obviously means that the rocket fell some day before, right? But we can still narrow down the period when it happened, right? And of course, we look for signs for manipulation with the material, like if it was cloned or something was added or removed. So when all of the things we verify and they look for us to be true, then we consider it verified, and then we publish our findings about this indeed happened, and then we try to understand who did that, right? So not only confirm that it's authentic, but also find those responsible, right? Just an accountability side, it's not published, right? So because we don't want to impede the future legal proceedings. And we follow the methodology. So we have a special setup that would increase chances of this information being admissible in court, right? So because it's for courts to decide whether this information can be admissible first. So it's not automatically admissible. And you have to provide the court with how did you find it? Show everything. Basically, you have to be absolutely transparent and demonstrate that there's no biases involved, or if they're involved, how you mitigate them, right? And it's very important for journalistic output as well. It's just in in the legal proceedings, it's very rigid. So there are lots of rules that you have to follow, which you don't have to follow really in a journalistic one, but they are not less reliable.
That sounds challenging, but also very thrilling, I must say. When you look at some of the main challenges from your point of view, and probably really from the legal one, where you said, okay, what does it really take? That's something we figure out where we're really sure, okay, that's what happened, and where we think we have an uninterrupted chain of the original document being used, not being tampered, and we can really, as you said, transparently show where it was done, when it was done, the analysis, the source, and all the way to it being at least proposed to a court for being used. What are some of really the main challenges you encourage in your day-to-day work? And if you look back, what has been one or two of the main successes where you said, wow, that was really groundbreaking, or that was really something where we think we did pioneering job in terms of digital evidence in court cases?
I think I would start with the last section of your
please
question.
do.
So, because essentially we are all of the few who shape this area, so not just digital open source investigations, but actually the way of using these findings in courts. It's hard to say how it is going to be perceived, right? So this provides us with a lot of room for experimentation, right? So we have lawyers, right? Those from Global Legal Action Network. I myself a lawyer, which helps a bit with kind of legal aspects of work. But the thing is that currently no one knows, not in Bellingcat, but generally, right? But at the same time, we are communicating with national authorities and international criminal tribunals, and they are very, very interested in our work. And they not only interested in our work, but our methods, right? We know from different sources that our methodology, which is public and on the website, is used by some of the UN bodies internally, right? Just to see what they do corresponds to it, right? Because it's very thorough, hands-on guide how to do that. So in terms of like success, they are yet to come. Success is definitely challenges with this work. Of course, it's again because we're paving the way, right? So providing room for experimentation also provides it's trial and error approach, right? And we try to mitigate it by looking at for the developments in law, what happened like in jurisprudence, right? But we also do mock trial hearings, which means that so we invite like prominent lawyers and judges which are independent from us, right, to simulate how the court process would look like, and we don't have any influence over it. Again, this
great.
This is all public. So there are 2 videos which record the entire like mock hearing on admissibility, and next year, several weeks ago, we had another second mock trial, which was actually deciding on merits, which means that it was actually not looking at admissibility, but it was found admissible in the first place. So then you have to look at the actual material. Does it have any merit, right, to the claim that is made? And so we just finished it a couple of weeks ago. We still don't know the result, right? But next year is going to be, and it's very, very interesting that many like prominent judges, they just really love it. I mean, no matter the outcome, we're going to learn. If it's positive, amazing. If it's negative, we know where we can improve. So which will save us time in the future.
Yeah, it's great to be in that phase where you're actually shaping a new field, where you say, well, we're moving all kinds of society, all aspects of society. We're moving more and more into the digital and the kinetic world, being much more entangled with each other. And what does it mean for your field of work? I think it's exciting to be partly in the driver's seat, or at least being able to shape it. And as you said, building on experience, and you can look back on a track record of more than a decade of doing this work. And I think it's great.
Yeah, it is. It's like no one tells us what is right, what is wrong. So this concept doesn't really apply here. It's a pure experimentation, and which I really like, because it always brings some new perspectives, always bring you some new challenges that you don't really go into like a routine a lot. Right? But another challenge, as I mentioned, is recycling of information, right? And now also fakes that we see. Speaking about Ukraine, we haven't really noticed that many fakes. Usually it's like some recycled images, but not to the very large extent. But in the conflict in the Middle East right now, there is a lot of, as I mentioned before, images from Syria presented as related to conflict that happens now. And everything happens so fast. So I think we have never seen this amount of misinformation ever. It feels like everything that we were working on kind of came all together at the same time. And really everyone in Bellingcat now works flat out, because you can't let it like this, right? Because it has huge implications to have some misinformation spread and have immediate reaction and violence in other parts of the world, right? And this is the challenge, as well as in the very polarized conflicts. There always one party is offended. As an investigator, you have to accept that either party will not like you, will blame you, and no one likes to be, responsible for. But that's the part of the job. It's challenging for investigator personally.
Yeah. And just following Bellingcat and yourself and some of your colleagues, partly on Twitter, but mainly on LinkedIn, and then on your homepage itself, it's amazing to see the amount of high quality output you have at the moment, especially in regards to Middle East, Israel, Palestine, and related reactions to what's happening down there, or what's supposedly happening down there.
Thank you, Björn. It's we really appreciate it.
Yeah. You just mentioned, although in another context, no one tells us what's right or wrong. But you also mentioned ethical issues earlier, where I said we at Bellingcat, we really want to make sure we work in an ethical way. And without knowing your work en detail, I think I can sense the dilemma of, on the one hand, wanting to be transparent, on the other hand, making sure we're not putting sources at risk. Sometimes if you say, well, this video was taken there and there, it obviously puts the very person who filmed it at risk. Working on very often gruesome, violent content where you say, we don't actually want to contribute to spreading that content. We don't want to contribute to spreading hate messages and fear and terror and what else. And at the same time, also making sure even the people you investigate, the people who say, we think there are indications that this person or this unit has been involved in war crimes, mass violence, they still have a right for having their privacy protected. How do you deal with these dilemmas in Bellingcat?
It's definitely a very pressing problem, generally related to open source. Use of open source information, because quite often the author and the provider of it are not the same people. And so when we talk about admissibility of this kind of information, right, you said that they have the right to protect their privacy. Not only for that, they also have a general rule of a fair trial, right, applied to them, which means that they have equality of arms, right? They have adequate time and facilities to prepare their defense. They have a right to be tried without any delays, and they have a right to examine and challenge, right, what is incriminating like the material. But the problem is that, as I mentioned, we quite often don't know the author, so we cannot really summon this person to testify about what was happening there. So this is the problems that are there. But definitely we haven't reached that part, because this is what actually happens in the court, right? And so far, from justice and accountability, none really ended in court yet, because it takes years to go through like these stages. Like if you ever see to look at the previous large international criminal proceedings, or Yugoslavia, or any other, it takes years, right? And out of like hundreds of people are suspected, then going to be dozens who are accused, and a couple who will be sentenced if they manage to survive by then. Yeah. Right. I would say that definitely we, as a journalistic organization, definitely there's a principle of do no harm. For example, if we have a material which is filmed from inside of the apartment, right, and you can definitely, by looking at this apartment, identify the person who made this video. Yeah, it would not be made public, right? It's going to be closed, right? If we're talking about judicial proceedings, if we're talking about journalistic output, we usually, like, in order not to spread violence, not to spread intolerance, and when you publish something with this far-right symbols, right, neo-Nazi symbols, you kind of indirectly spread it. So we only use them when we have to make a point out of it, right? That this person uses this. If publishing that doesn't make our case stronger, we just blur it.
Okay.
So that doesn't really perpetuate this circle of violence.
Interesting and challenging.
Yes.
Yeah. From just following the news, and also from just following this trend of open source investigations, open source intelligence, however you want to call it, I know there's a big element of crowdsourcing, of relying on people who can verify, who can say, yes, this is actually a crossroads just half a mile down the road from where I live, and I can verify that's a shop or a sign which is around here. So on the one hand, depending on crowdsourcing. On the other hand, as we said, very often the very nature of the content is gruesome, is potentially traumatizing, is very graphic, and is potentially harmful to the very people who watch it. And I think it was one of your colleagues, and I hope I attributed to your right colleague, I'm not sure. I think it was Giancarlo Fiorella who said, once something is in your head, you can't get it out of your head. Once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. And you have to be aware, if you get into this participating in verification, you need to be conscious about the potential risk in terms of mental hygiene, mental health, potential trauma, vicarious secondary trauma. What's your experiences? How do you make sure that the people who want to engage with you and the people who directly work at Bellingcat, that you're not, let's say, going over the edge here?
Yeah, I would say so. In the first place, we definitely use crowdsource, and it's the feature of Bellingcat, essentially. And we have two initiatives, right, that we kind of put in. So the first one is more like a general Discord server, actually established by Giancarlo Fiorella and Eric Toller, right? And we have over like 23,000 people there, if I'm not mistaken, right? So it's really active. So people are there sharing. It's very lively, and this is where they can collaborate, and help us, right? But we also have a project called Global Authentication Project, GAP for short, which was done by the efforts of Charlotte Godard and Hannah Bagdasar. So this is where we actually create a thematic sort of groups to help us in a closed manner, right? So we vet these people. So in the general Discord server, anyone can join. And I can only advise you to join, like, all the interested in open source, because this is where you can learn a lot. You understand what it is. You will know how to do that. You can ask questions if you have. So definitely anyone who is interested in open source investigations would really benefit from joining it. But from there, from just calling for volunteers, we select and vet those who possess skills that can be useful for a particular project that we have. For example, I myself was a volunteer. Right.
Okay.
So I was volunteering for a Ukrainian project. So I was helping with verification. There was lots of materials happening. And after a while, I just was hired as a full-time member. But so this is how it works. But we still rely on GAP. So there are other people who continue this kind of work, helping us, spending their free time on this. We should really appreciate, because the amount of materials, our team is very small. It's from the investigative point of view, it's like 5, and not all of them even working full-time.
Yeah.
So the capacity is very limited, and without our volunteers, without our crowdsource, that would be really challenging.
Before we go on, if people are interested in that, could you just briefly say the link, or where could people...
I have a link. I think we can put it in the description, like with other links, maybe.
Sorry for interrupting. I just thought you're always interested in newcomers with skills. It might be that some people listen to it here and say, oh, great, I would like to volunteer. I have some skills I can offer.
Even without skills, because we are an educational facility, right? So our purpose is to design, apply, and teach, right? So everything that we do, we teach others, right? Not for the sake of doing investigation, but to grow the community of those who are capable of doing that. Sometimes we do trainings for free. Sometimes we have to sustain, right? So we have paid workshops. But our mission and our vision is to empower the community to be able to do this type of work as we do. That's the difference. And regarding the second question about mental health, indeed, what Giancarlo Fiorella said, and we all share this. First of all, we look after each other, right? Sometimes you don't even notice after working with this material that something is wrong with you, but others can. Right. So we have a routine checks with a DART center, right? So we can, like, once, I think, in half a year, we schedule a call with specialists from there, and they already know our baseline, because we have like a baseline call when they see us before this work, so they can always see if something goes like kind of anomaly happening from this baseline. But of course, as Giancarlo said, once you saw it, you can't really take it out of your head. So one has to really think, do you really need to see that? Can you just read about it? And if not, can you watch it without sound? Right? Is sound important? Because sound can be as dramatic. And if you have to watch it, do you really need to see the colors? So because when you make it black and white, right, it reduces this kind of perception of various bodily fluids, for example, or it doesn't perceive as real as it can be. If you don't really know what happens in the video that you're going to see, try to understand from the context what may be there, and reduce the volume of the sound. Maybe listening for sound first would be beneficial than watching it, or maybe watching without the sound. It really depends on the... Sometimes you can even have a transcription, right, in YouTube. Sometimes it's possible to transcribe it, and from the text you can understand that something gory would happen there, and you should be careful. And we have like 2 articles about how to maintain this mental health hygiene before and after you've been traumatized, because this vicarious trauma that accumulates, and you have to be, as a researcher, be able to deal when you're exposed to this, right? Not on before, like, but you do your best, but being traumatized, it's unfortunately very often in our field. And so we teach the same thing to our volunteers, right? We definitely tell it quite regularly for everyone involved, like, take a break, don't look at it if you don't have to. So we are really interested in keeping our people healthy, because first of all, out of compassion, right? And then it's because they will not be able to function at all, especially like I'm speaking about staff, right? For volunteers, it's a bit different, but we also encourage them to take breaks, because some of them, it's the kind of work you had to stop because you feel that you always have to go further and further. And it's just like, it's amazing mentality, because as an investigator, you have to be like, this is, I don't know, big part of the success. But sometimes you have to take...
And I think it's important what you say here. We're coming together with the technical expertise in this new world, which suddenly is accessible from all over the world. At the same time, you mentioned some of the centers you collaborate with very often with a journalistic background, I think, where they build on years, on decades of experiences of war reporters, of people in protracted, highly violent contexts, and what does it mean in terms of working there, but also working trauma sensitive. But at the same time, me coming from the peace building background, where very often we have similar challenges, probably to different degrees. But I think it's so important to really make that a point and not saying, well, I'm strong, it won't affect me. I watch yourself and have someone else, have a buddy which knows you and is your mirror, gives you feedback, and ask for professional help, mentoring. Don't try to be strong in the wrong meaning of strong.
I absolutely agree. I
Yeah.
can sign for every word you said. Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned earlier where you said, if we look just at the last 4 to 6 weeks with the eruption of violence again in Israel, Palestine, we said, we from Bellingcat, we have the feeling it never came together with all the kind of misinformation and the repercussions, the consequences it has all over the world in real-time reactions. And you said, and if I now look at the developments also in terms of AI and the limits to verifying things, just looking at the current trends, you probably follow them much closer than I do. Positive trends or encouraging trends which make us hopeful, but also trends where you think, here I see our uphill battle getting even more uphill, getting more demanding. Can you just look at some of the trends and where's something which really makes you hopeful in terms of your work and in terms of open source investigation for, let's say, accountability, maybe for holding people to account and witnessing and probably early warning? And at the same time, where are trends where you just think the work has been hard enough? And this is a trend which will make it even harder.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the perspective of being positive, I would say that even though everything that we worked before came at the same time, we are ready for that. That's the great thing. So we were working on this, right? Maybe it was more isolated. So we are now ready and we are open to help others if they want to do this kind of work, to teach them how to do that. So it didn't caught us by surprise. It's the amount, but not the actual type of material. So we are ready. This is positive, I would say. The other positive stuff is that one of the main problems, again, with the admissibility of open source information for justice and accountability purposes, is that there are not clear rules, especially in speaking particular example on Ukraine. It's less developed there. And because it's a hurdle, but the positive side of it is that they themselves open several initiatives when people can submit. It means that they have a really huge interest. And we know it because we are communicating with them, that they are interested in this type of material. So it feels like that sooner than later, the legislation will be more permissible in terms of admitting this type of information as evidence. So this is what we are looking at, and we are open to that, as well as international tribunals as well. Right. Challenges that we see, in a way, it's a perfect storm because technology like this AI generated text and AI generated images, they really got their momentum like over the last year. And now in the conflict, Israel and Hamas and Gaza, and many other parties, I would say it's very hard to define one party there. So they evolve quite significantly, which for us, we can definitely distinguish them, but for the general public, it's getting harder and harder. And so if we are concerned about court of law, it's getting harder to deliver the message. Right? Because it becomes court of public opinion, which we don't really want to have. The voices of those who present other point of view, they're blamed. That's part of it. And I don't see how it can get any better, but actually worse.
Not very hopeful. I mean, it's great to hear that you...
Not very hopeful, but we have to be ready. I think that's very important too, that we acknowledge the problem first and be honest about it rather than just disregarding it because it's very negative thing.
But it's great to hear where you said, well, it's a sheer amount, which is a huge challenge. But if we break it down, it's actually the individual piece we're looking at, the individual event. We're actually quite ready. We have a proven track record. We have the experience. We have the capacities, and we can deal with that. But the sheer amount, obviously, is challenging. And as you said, I think if you combine it with our inbuilt confirmation bias, I think if there's some situations somewhere in the world where I'm emotionally not attached, I'm probably much more willing to say, let's give it a nuanced look. And if someone convinces me, that's fine. But I think especially in these emotionally protracted conflicts, which stir up emotions all over the world right away, I think our confirmation bias of what we want to believe and don't want to believe probably kicks in much quicker and makes it much harder to take the time and take the patience to actually engage with evidence.
Yeah, I wanted to also chip in briefly. So we as a Bellingcat, and it's a wide-known organization in the field, we can sustain some high level of pressure from various governments and organizations, but we are moving the community forward. And there are many talented researchers who do brilliant work, but they work independently. And when they come to specific conclusions, sometimes they may be deterred to publish them because it will not go in line with kind of appropriate sort of line of events that, one party or another. And because they're going to be harassed by fanatics, and there is a real danger, like tangible risk for life involved, because people just come and hurt them. And if we can sustain that, so many organizations can't. And I think definitely on the policy side, and we are not activists, right? We're investigative collective. But on a policy level, there must be something done to protect those voices can be suppressed by the court of public opinion and by, repressing. Basically, it's damaging the democracy and damaging the society when these voices are heard. No one wants to kind of listen.
George, we're slowly coming to an end. 2 more questions. The first one is probably an easy one. If people want to learn more about your work, just as a consumer, so to speak, or also learn more about your work, you mentioned trainings and other community of practitioners earlier, where should they go to? Where can they learn and find more about you?
Yeah, it is very easy because we have a central point of distributing our work. It's our site, bellingcat.com. For both justice and accountability and traditional journalistic output. But of course, our researchers specialize in particular specific topics and specific regions, and they're all available on social media. In the website, one can find all links to all of our social media accounts on myriads of platforms that exist now. We're trying to establish a presence everywhere, so we
cover it all. Yeah, great. I'm gonna put that link in the show notes and really encourage people to check there regularly. It's one of those websites where it's really worth visiting each and every week. I can highly recommend it. And the next one is probably a bit more challenging. Beyond your own work, beyond the work of your own organization, is there an additional resource you would like to share with the others, which looks into the nexus where emerging technologies, digital domains, modern tech, and peace building, conflict transformation, and human rights work come together? Is there something you can share with us which is from beyond Bellingcat's work?
Me personally, as someone who does investigations with a legal angle sort of thing, and from the peace building perspective, I follow myself the work of Public International Law and Policy Group, which is a non-profit organization operating as a law firm, right? So they are engaged in transitional justice, documentation of human rights violations, and peace building generally. And because they have legal angle and they have peace building angle, it's what's interesting to me to follow. So Public International Law and Policy Group, that's what I would say like this.
Great. Also, I'm going to put the link in the show notes so people can find it easily and can check it out. And I think it's nice for all of us, especially from the peace building sector, who work on, as you mentioned, transitional justice in one way or another, with a memory angle or if it's with an accountability angle. I think it really is a great resource. George, it's been really nice chatting with you. I would love to do that more often. I hope we meet again sometime soon. But for today, thank you very much for sharing your insights. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Björn. It was a pleasure. Absolutely. I agree. We should do it much more often.
There's a chance again for that.
Thank you.
So much for today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of the future episodes. And I would really appreciate if you leave me a rating on iTunes, on Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more about the Peacebuilding Practitioner, head over to my webpage. That's www.thepeacebuildingpractitioner.org, where you find plenty of articles from practitioners for practitioners. And if you want to dive even deeper into this field of work, join us for one of our online courses. If you want to learn more about that, just get in contact with me. You'll find the contact details in the show notes or on my webpage.